Okay, the time is 5:50. We will continue our training, we will continue our meeting on governance. So Patricia,
All right,
I'll let
great.
you take it.
We have the whole family here now.
We've got the whole family.
Whole group. Great, I understand you guys had already done.
They've
So,
already done that.
do you have any takeaways from the ISO training that you did that you want to share with the rest of the board? You did a lot of share outs. So we'll make sure.
We did quite a bit too.
I love this template here.
Yeah. The monitoring
Yeah,
calendar.
the monitoring calendar, breaking down, the different goals and trainings and everything that we need to pretty much know, when we're going to do what for the year. And then the monitoring report on the back. I thought that was really good, being able for the district to be able to share information regarding the status and the progress of the students, and we'll be able to see that data and see it broken down, and and the plans that they have to put in place. So I thought this was really beneficial.
I was going to say the Region 20 training was interesting. There were about a dozen board members there from around South Texas, or actually close to Bear County. I think the furthest was Natalia, just to give you a perspective on that. What I found really interesting, and I don't know if you did that, but they actually went to the simulation on the website for TEA where they showed the test, and we actually answered some questions about testing that would be on the STAR. So that was part of the training for some odd reason, and we would read the questions, answer them, and again, just really interesting. That whole apparatus.
Did you find them hard? We didn't do a test in here.
No, we didn't.
Well, we're not smarter than a fifth grader, I can tell you that.
It was fun. I think it was a collective board members giving their answers, and it was interesting to see it. But it was very slow, so it made us think about when the TEA tried this before, how everything crashed on the STAR system. So we're hoping it doesn't happen again, because Region 20, that whole process was really slow to move. So we'll just see how that goes.
Yeah.
And they also told us that they've implemented some pretty hefty safeguards to prevent that from happening again.
Good. Yeah, so I'm glad you guys had that opportunity to take some of those tests. I know I have, and they are hard. Made me question my Nebraska public education. And maybe those acting classes. But, all right, well, we're glad to have you back here. So we're going to finish up. As I said, this is kind of the final, what we were talking about earlier, and I think you guys were in the room, but just the connection of that ISO information, the work that is done, the accountability system, all of that to the work that you guys do in the boardroom, even the work in the with our emerging bilinguals and our students with disability. How does that fuse in? How does that factor into the questions you ask, the data you look at, and the strategies you resource? So we're going to put in, and the good thing is you guys almost have the whole framework, and so now we're going to put in one of those final pieces of the framework and finish up the values. So we have done our board, and I think we finalized our goal progress measures for our goals. So you have those. Those will be moving forward then as we set up the calendar. Those are something that, all of this structure now will be adopted and written into AE Local. So that'll be the final step before we move forward. And my hopes is that we have every single thing in order, ready to go, so that when you start the year, the new year in August, you have all of this, and you have this calendar and really strong monitoring, and that we work through some of the policy work that goes with that, so that that structure is constantly enhanced, and we set up your superintendent and her team for the success, right? So our kids have what they need to be successful. I think 22-23 is going to be such a critical year, as I said earlier, and so we're really going to have to work hard. We're going to have more money to do some work, and so we're going to be leaning in. So that'll be interesting, and you guys will be way ahead of the curve because you'll have this structure in place. So tonight, we're gonna finalize those superintendent, non-negotiables and constraints, which I gave you kind of your draft. I sent this to you back in March, based on our last session. We've got, kind of narrowed it down to 7, that you guys felt were highest priority. I'm gonna ask you to have no more than 5 of those, so we're gonna have to narrow that down a little bit more. And then we'll talk about the targets a little bit with Dr. Ball, where she sees us, how does this measure, and then of course the constraint progress measures, just like the goal progress measures, will be, you guys can say, these are the directions we want to see, these are the indicators we're interested in, and then the team, the superintendent and our team will go back and really work on those progress measures to make sure that they're aligned with what they're already measuring, that they make sense, that they are indicative of the constraint, that they show progress, and they're what you guys want to see on a regular basis. Does that make sense?
So rather than 7, we really need to focus on 5.
No more than 5.
No more than 5. Okay.
Because, we said this before with the goals, if you're measuring too much, then you're probably not going to measure anything.
Right. Okay.
So we just want to make sure, and these are things that if we see a lot of significant progress, the constraints are things that can vary and change, year to year as well. So we can create and shift as you move forward. The other thing that we're going to finalize, and I think we're really close on this, but I just wanted to make sure that I put this in front of you, is the board constraints. These, again, are the constraints that you have given to yourselves, your self-constraints, and how you operate. And so I want to make sure that because these will also be codified in policy. So I gave you a copy of those. So those are the 2 big components that we're going to get. And we've already talked a little bit about the monitoring calendar. And then we'll do a board self-evaluation based on the governance integrity model that I showed you guys and that you have in your folder. And then we'll do that again, and then we'll see progress made, right? And so I think we can set goals around your own self-evaluation, like where do you want to be? I would love to see you be at a 60, which is out of 100, which is a really high-performing board. I'd love to see you at 100. But once again, like board outcome goals, I won't put too much of that because I think this structure and this governance, the way you're leaning into it, is going to be helpful for your superintendent, and it'll also lead up to next year's superintendent evaluation, which will be based on these progress measures. And so it's a full year of really good governance in place that creates the structure for conditional success and impact for kids. So that's what we're going to finish up tonight. Any questions? Anything I left off? Anything you want to do other than this? All right. We already did our one-word check-in. How are you guys feeling?
Amazing.
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 Amazing. Okay, we got a lot of happy. Now we got amazing. These guys came in ready to roll. All right, cool. So I already showed you that. We're not talking about that. The vision is where do we want to be, and that's our goals, and we talked about that already. So these are our board student outcome goals. You already have those in your books. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them. But these 4 goals are what you've said you want to focus in on. And in these, you can certainly see the 3 HB3 goals, and then a strong middle school math goal as well. So how are we making sure we're measuring that progress? So those are our goals. This is where we want to be. You already talked about that. We're going to do this. Sorry, this is all review. This might be a hold. I think I gave them the wrong one. So we're not going to do this. We're going to turn this off. So we already did our constraints. So we're going to go ahead and just look at the piece of paper that we had. So first one we're going to look at is our board constraints. Any questions or thoughts, since you've had time to review these now, you've had time to sit with them, we've been kind of leaning towards them, we've talked a lot about them. The board, I'm going to just go through them one more time with you guys. The board, either collectively or through the actions of individual board members, shall not give or appear to give the operational advice or instructions to district staff. We're going to not micromanage. We're going to lean into balanced governance. That's basically what you've agreed to in there. The board shall not spend less than 50% of its total work time discussing student goal progress and superintendent constraints. That's these monitoring reports. That's this calendar. We're going to lean in, right? Of course, you're going to have to talk about other things that are important and that are mandated, but the bulk of your discussions are going to be robust questions about how are our students doing and what are we doing to create the conditions for their success. The board will not violate its own board policy and operating procedures. So I think there was a conversation about maybe taking a look at those operating procedures and reviewing them. That's something we can certainly do. But your board policy is going to include these goals. It's going to include these constraints. So let's lean into it. It's going to include monitoring and progress. And the board, either collectively or through the actions of individual board members, shall not behave in a manner that erodes trust and respect amongst the team of 8. So, you know, we can have, and we talked about this, courageous conflict, productive conflict. We can have debate that lifts up issues. We can have all of that, and we should have that. We should have that in this room. That's critical. But we need to do it so that it is always moving towards something that is going to be exceptional for our kids, right? How are we impacting our kids? But it isn't about personalities. It's always back to the work. It's always back to how do we improve outcomes for our kids, the conditions for our staff, what are we doing to create that? So that's what that's talking about. And I don't think that this board has had an issue with disrespect, but I think it's always something that we can point to, that this is important for us, that we do this in a respectful manner while not ceding our individual thoughts and viewpoints, and questions are good. Questions are good that are aligned in progress. The board shall not operate more than 6 months without a board self-evaluation, reflection, and action using the LSG instrument. And the reason that I recommend using the LSG instrument is because that's frames everything that we've been working on, and I think it's a good instrument for you to use to measure yourselves. Have we, as board members, created the conditions for success? At the very minimum, you should do a board self-evaluation prior to ever doing a superintendent evaluation, right? You should hold yourselves accountable. We talked a lot about accountability today, right? Accountability that is good. We hold ourselves accountability. It shows up in our lives in many different ways. So those are your board constraints. Any questions, any thoughts?
Have we seen the LSG instrument?
It's in your binder,
Oh, and I didn't bring my binder.
and
Okay.
we're gonna look at it again today.
Okay.
The evaluation is six areas, and it's basically in everything we've already talked about. It's
I do have
leaning
a
in.
comment before we go too much further. I should have stopped you when you were up there looking at what the goals were. The first slide. I
Board
think.
goals?
Yes.
I mean, the
Superintendent goals, yes. And obviously we were all here when we talked about the percentage in terms of math and where we'd like to be in 5 years and all that. And back then I disagreed. So I'm not going to support them when we come to vote for them. I'm going to vote against or vote no for it because I still don't agree with it. But I just want to be real with everyone here to know that when it comes up, I'm not going to support that. I don't agree with them. But that's just my issue. So just so it's all out there.
So your disagreement, just to make sure that I'm very clear, is with the targets,
For
not
third
the
grade
goal
students,
itself.
not the goal itself, but the targets of third grade students and seventh grade, which essentially is 4 of the 5 that I have, or 3 of the 4 that I have concerns with, that I think we're aiming low. And so if in 2026 we're at those percentages, I wouldn't be satisfied as a board member. And so anyway, those are just my personal feelings. Again, consensus was to move forward, but I'm not going to,
I didn't know
I'm not
we
going
had
to
that
support
far
that.
out.
And if given the opportunity, I'll echo why. I don't want people to think I'm just being no to be no. I have rationale why I have concerns. But just want to make sure that my colleagues are aware of that so they don't feel like, hey, where'd this come from? I mean, I've been saying this from the beginning.
Understand, and certainly I think y'all have the opportunity to explain your position. And I think the importance is, are we measuring progress and making sure that we're monitoring these goals, and you agree with the goals themselves? So, hopefully we'll exceed expectations, right? And we won't have, and you'll be in line, right? It'll be in line. So, but I think the rest of the board did, seem like we were all in agreement that this is where we were when we worked with the superintendent team. So we'll certainly put that into the vote and make sure that.
And I respect Jose because he has told us why. He feels that they are too low. And I can definitely respect that. So we all know that we want to exceed, but I completely respect what he said.
I think it's a fair, those are fair dialogues, and you in lifting that up, and I think we continue to talk about that every time we look at progress, right? What are we doing to keep exceeding our expectations in all cases?
Yeah, but this is on target in terms of developing those goals for the board, for the superintendent. But I just want to be as real as possible now, just so there's no surprises when we get to this.
I appreciate that. Okay, so
Can
now.
I ask a question?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Jose, just out of curiosity, what do you see as a more realistic expectation as far as the percentages? Because I know that's what's bothering you.
Yeah, I know that we've talked about realistic goals, and anything that is over Texas averages or even Bexar County averages that show growth, and these numbers, some of them were still below Bexar County targets today, as well as state targets. So unless we get to where we can say we've exceeded those, I would feel happier with setting those expectations. I know Dr. Ball is still aiming. She even told me afterwards, we're still going to aim for them, but she's just trying to establish a realistic objective. And
Right.
I just think with the resources we're pouring into pre-K, these third graders should be well prepared for us to be ambitious in our goals. That's basically it.
Because like next year will really be the first year that even though the third graders are moving to first grade, that they really have sat a year in a classroom. Because for 2 years, they were, first and second grade at home on a computer and...
Well, this 5-year target incorporates pre-K3. So pre-K4, pre-K3, pre-K4, kinder, first, second. So by year 5, by 2026, they would not have been touched by the pandemic. You have a clear road and pathway based on our investments where we should see, in my opinion, increases. That's why I say that.
Greater
I can
increase.
always understand the 7th grade, but it was still, we have a lot of mountain to climb in terms of where we are. Anyway.
No, I understand. Yeah. Thank you, though, for clarifying that for me.
Okay, so I wanted to just move to the board constraints and make sure those were still okay. We're good with those? All right. Just making sure I'm looking at everyone here. Okay. All right, so let's go to the superintendent constraints. These are the ones, remember we did a lot of whiteboard work, and we did a lot of these things. I did my best to take your ideas, your thoughts, and put them into tangible constraints that I thought got to your meeting, but I want to make sure. So at the top were the areas of concern that you guys had, so we kind of started there. We were unhappy maybe with the percentage of students that were on our DNF campuses and where those were and who those kids were. We wanted to make sure that we were providing a space of access and opportunity for our economically disadvantaged kids. We really wanted to talk about equity, whether that's by race or student population. We just talked a lot about our emerging bilinguals. We talked a lot about our kids with disabilities. but also, our children that are economically disadvantaged as well. Family partnerships in particular, in support of our children with special needs and how we're doing a better job of addressing them, district culture, and choice and innovation. So those were the areas that I took from you guys and put into these. These are totally only suggestions. We are here to discuss them. And so let's start with, if that's all right, can we just start with campus performance? And we can wordsmith this, we can address it, we can have questions. Also, the suggestions of the goal of the constraint progress measures are my suggestions. They are not Dr. Ball's. They haven't been run by her team. So I just want to make sure that those are both acceptable to you and acceptable and predictive of what you guys want to see. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to finalize these as much as we can, I hope.
And I do have a copy with some of it already filled in.
Okay,
Oh,
let's work from that. Excellent.
And then lots of questions, but some of them have already been answered.
Thank you.
So these already have the X and the Y's filled out?
Not for all of them, because I had a lot of questions, but on some of them.
Questions for us or for Patricia?
For you.
Thank you, Dan.
Or for Patricia, I mean, either or in regards to what this really was looking for.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, on the first one, the superintendent shall not allow the number of students in low-performing D or F rated campuses to increase or remain the same. So the very first one, constraint, measure 1.1, the percentage of students served in low-performing campuses will decrease from 8% to 5% by the end of the year 2023. The number of low-performing campuses will decrease from 3 to 2 by the year 2023.
Does that match up with those percentages? Like if we did decrease from 3 to 2, would that result in a decrease of like 8% to 5% students?
Oh, no, because the campus sizes are so different.
Different?
So
Oh, okay. So it would like depend on which campus it was. Okay.
Then number 3, constraint, measure number 3, the number of campuses that are effectively implementing PLCs will increase from 5 to 15 by 2023.
How are you measuring the effective implementation of PLCs?
Yeah, we did a lot of talking about that because giving an agenda and having one is not an effective one. So we're still looking at that part of it right now to see what would be the best tool
Okay.
to use for that. And then the training for it, just because you've done the training doesn't mean that it's effective either. So we have to find a tool that we could really use to help us measure that. I'm open to suggestions if you have.
Is there anything on the employee, like is there a question on the employee survey about PLC at their campus and like?
Not specifically about PLC.
Got it.
My worry is also in regards to that, what some teachers think is a good PLC and what really is a good PLC is totally different.
Yeah.
What's a PLC?
Professional learning communities, if when the teachers get together for data disaggregation, for planning, for looking to see where's the benchmark says where they need to go, the next steps, the building of the curriculum, those types of conversations. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want me to stop and have more dialogue on this, or?
Well, I wanted to see if you guys felt, first of all, if those were good indications, predictors of this this constraint. So that would be my first question for the board to ask. And then my second question kind of pertains to what Jenny just asked is, what kind of a rubric or something that you would have, or do you already have for...
Right, and maybe what would help me is if I understood what the board was really looking for this? When y'all set this one out, what you were really looking for, maybe that would help me understand what you're really looking for when y'all brought up this one. Because there must have been some reason why the board brought this one up, and maybe I just...
Like a constrained progress measure or
The POC specifically. Why
Oh, the
that?
POC.
Oh, I don't remember that
I
being
don't
a
either.
I
thing.
think that's something that Patricia put in.
I put that in, and that's once again, that's why I said these
Oh,
were
okay.
my suggestions
Well, that makes
from
me feel
other
better.
boards.
I remember, and I was thinking,
Yeah, the other boards
Got
had
it.
used these type of them, so I wanted to not just give you a blank, I
Got it,
wanted
okay.
to at least give you some kind of support.
Absolutely.
So we don't need that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make
Did
more
y'all connect
confusion.
before this?
I'm sorry?
Did y'all connect before on these?
No, we have not talked about these yet. So I think what we can do is, I think what I'd like to do is, like, for you, Dr. Ball, to say, what would be another measure that you think would be indicative and predictive of that constraint? And then ask you, board, is there something else that you would want to see that's important? I'm trying to see here, and your notes was, you wanted to see the number of low-performing campuses change, right? And then there was a note here, and I don't remember whose constraint this was, but 50% of time, PMST outcome goals, time spent on, I think that didn't have anything to do with that. Sorry, my bad.
It was a separate one, I think. That's my handwriting, I think.
Oh, okay. That must have been for something else.
Yeah.
So, what other ways would you want to measure this?
I would want to use the beginning of the year benchmark exam specifically for pre-K, because we have invested lots of money in that. That is a big thing, so I would like to see something in that area.
So, that would directly result in, so can you explain how that would be predictive of that?
Sure, because I think that if we don't start to catch them early on that they're falling behind, then the gap just starts to get wider and wider. So it all goes back to making sure that when they go into third grade, they're really on third grade level. If not, then we miss the mark in the pre-K program.
Because what determines their accountability rating is only the 3rd through 5th grade scores.
At elementary.
Okay. Thank you.
So, what you're saying is,
So very similar to what we brought last month, where you got to see the benchmarks results from the beginning of the year, and the middle of the year, and then at the end you'll get to see the end of the year.
Right.
So looking at that data.
When we do, if we decide to do that, what was glaringly missing was a comparative. And I asked a question about how do we compare? How do we know that the progress is good? So I would like to add that element to it so that we can truly have a comparative, just like if we looked at STAR and we're compared against other districts.
Right, but the thing about that poses a challenge is that in pre-K, you don't have to use the same assessment.
And that's sort of what I'd like to get to a point where we're using strong assessments that might have the ability to be evaluated so that we really know we're doing the best. I know that not all pre-Ks are created the same, but there's opportunity there. And if we can't truly measure outside, I don't know if we're getting the best data. We can certainly look at beginning of year, middle of year, end of year internally, but
It's the value added component that we're really looking at, that they're making progress from when they first started. It's not really that we're comparing ourselves to Northeast or Northside or Alamo Heights, because they could be using the same, but at the same time, every school district could.
They're not required to report that data.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like, we're using the same assessments because there's like 3 that the state will allow you to use, but it's not required to report it.
well, there has to be some benchmark in which.
Is that just for the pre-K though?
For
Yeah,
pre-K.
just for pre-K. And I did talk with pre-K.
Pre-K through 2nd grade, I would say.
Right.
Pre-K through 2nd, yeah, you're right. It's a good window. I just think there's enough data out there that there could be some shared partnerships, because I'm certain other districts are probably thinking the same thing. So if there's a collaborative that could yield it, I'm just not entirely comfortable unless we have a measure against other standards.
You are getting a measure against other standards because the way that those assessments are designed is they have like benchmarks by age. So it's like a child that is this age should have met these, should be able to do these things, and it's like saying what percentage of those things are they able to do. So it's a developmental test. It won't necessarily, you won't be able to say like we're better than Northeast or whatever, but we can say that our children, our 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds are, you know, meeting the like grade level or developmental benchmarks that they should.
Is that because the assessments are already normed and standardized upon creation?
Exactly, yeah.
And we also have to consider that not every pre-K program is set up across districts the same. We're taking anybody, but not every district is doing that. And so, again, comparing apples and oranges, they're comparing, you know, we would be looking at data for across all economic groupings, not just low SES, not just emerging bilinguals, not just students whose parents have been in the service or you know. So the subset is not going to compare.
Well, and
It's not like all third grade students.
if we ultimately have decided that there's no way to find that sort of comparison, I was mentioning I did visit with Pre-KSA last week and had a tour of the facility, talked with their administrators there, and the thing that was distinctly different is they too have challenges with measuring pre-K, but they don't put all of their assessment in measuring student outcomes. They measure the teacher. And so measuring the teacher has a predictive indicator if the students are doing well. Again, above, I'm not an educator in the normal sense, so I didn't understand that completely. I'm going to need to look at that a little deeper to understand it. But that element of incorporating measuring teachers could be something we use in conjunction with what we're doing that then could have a universal assessment when you're looking at that. You would have to do more research on that because I certainly don't know, but it was interesting.
In a way, the assessment also does measure the teacher, because if let's say there's 5, pre-K teachers, all the other other 4 are being very successful, just this one is not. Well, is it because she's teaching it differently? Is she not on the right pacing guide? Is she, something there? So in a way, it does give us some information about the teacher.
Well, if you could look at what Pre-KSA is doing specifically, it sounded very strategic, and it sounded like there was a rubric behind it. It sounded really good. So again, just beyond my expertise, but certainly something I'd like to learn more about. But if we can't find, if what Ms. Rodriguez states is if there's built-in standards in it, that might be then difficult. But we can do something more.
So I think there's a couple of things I want to point out. One is when we think about measuring pre-K success, I noticed that isn't in any of our student outcome progress measures. So we don't have anything that brings pre-K into it. This could be a place where you could bring pre-K into this. I think you'd have to really want to make sure that whatever you're measuring around pre-K actually leads to moving a school from a D or an F to a C. Like, what is that doing to show progress? So I pulled this slide back up to just remind us that these are the domains, these are the things that are going to change that letter grade, and also to remind us too that they don't have a DNF rating coming out of this year. They'll be a not rated. So the 2022, they'll either be an A, B, C, or a not rated.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be that constraint, specific constraint, would be changed from not rated to either
C or above.
right, C or above.
Patricia.
And so that may change some of those constraints as well.
Okay, from your experience, how long does it take to move a failing school into passing, to at least start them to passing. They go from, to
Depends
go
why
from
they
a D
fail.
to a C.
I couldn't even hazard a guess, and I don't know that it would depend on the school, it depends on where the kids are and their, because you've got to move kids from one, that is the experts area, right, to be able to do that, so I can't, there's not a timeline, a strict timeline that you could say. I think what Dr. Ball is trying to say is, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that, this is the percentage of schools that we have that are below a C, that we want to make sure that we're at least moving a percentage of our kids out of those kind of schools, and not to move them from a school, but to change the way that school is rated.
Right, the school
Because-
itself.
Right.
The school culture.
Right, exactly. So that leans itself into also how well are we doing academically? So that's also going to be shown up in your goal progress measures, right? Because that's going to, if it's an elementary school that isn't a D or an F or not rated for next year, then, third grade literacy is going to affect that D or F rating. Closing the gaps is going to affect. So how did we close? How did we make sure that we lifted up our emerging bilinguals, or we lifted up our black kids? And so that's going to lift up that rating. All of those things, the math, the third grade math, those are all going to factor into that. And so it's pretty critical. And I don't know how many of your schools are elementary schools.
We
Middle
have
school.
20 elementary schools, 5 middle schools, and 4 high schools.
And what, I'm on the rating, but thank you.
Oh,
One
So,
elementary.
Like just below C.
right, so one of them is a D,
Mhm.
and it's Ed Franz.
mhm.
2
Elementary.
Elementary, sorry, yes, elementary. 2 middle schools that are Fs, Kirby and Kitty Hawk.
Okay, so to me, the focus is not on pre-K. If I want to move those F schools, those are middle school schools. So what are we doing in middle school that is going to change the ratings in those schools in these domains? That would be the progress measure that I would.
And that's what I'm, I guess, also asking, what should I be looking for to know that we're doing what we need to do, as a district to make that happen? I understand, having a school that's failing, it's the whole picture. It's not just the students, it's the teachers, it's the culture in that school,
Right.
the leadership. So what are we doing to fix that, to start moving in the direction of coming up out of that? And about how long should that take? Like you said, next year they're going to do A, B, C and not rated. How long are they going to allow us to go without a rating?
1 year.
Probably just one more year. So I think you're making a really great point, and I'm trying to link this back together. So to me, if I wanted to see progress on this, in a value statement, which is what our constraints are, it would be how are we supporting our educators in our middle schools that are low rated, or our
Yes.
elementary school, right? So what are we doing differently in those schools to make sure that we lift them up, right? So how do we demonstrate progress on that? That to me would show, like we can show, and I think it's great, we're gonna commit that we're gonna have one less school that is a D or an F. But I also think that part of the progress that you want to measure, because also what Dr. Ball's going to want to resource is how do we address all of those schools, right? And what are the resources that we're going to put in, and what are we going to get for those resources? What do those resources do? How do they support student programming? How do they support curriculum support? How do they support educator support? What is it, a special program we put in there for our middle schoolers? What are we doing differently? And so that's kind of where I think this type of, and that's probably where that PLC came out of that, is, what are we doing? How are we implementing change so that we don't just let that school remain an F school? Because we're trying to improve 7th grade math.
Yes.
So by improving 7th grade math, we're going to lift up that boat, right? In the elementary school, we got two third grade literacy and third grade math that we're lifting up, which is going to improve that school, right? So what other things that are outside of those academic achievement could we be doing and focusing on to demonstrate progress?
Don't those campuses have a targeted intervention plan in place? Could we pull something maybe from that plan? And part of it, Ms. Eaton, is they're not necessarily failing for the same reasons. For example, Franz is a very small school. It may be that they had one kid fail, and that brought that one subpopulation, that one student population down, that caused it to the school to receive that. At Kitty Hawk, it may be that there's a whole
Kirby.
Kirby and Kitty Hawk were the two middle schools. So looking at the reasons then determines how long it's going to take to come out of that. But that's what those targeted intervention plans that they develop, that they have to implement, that's how they say, this is what we're going to do to fix these problems. So I think looking at that, and I don't know what's on there because I haven't seen their plans, but there could be something that gets pulled from that specifically addresses the middle schools. Yeah.
I will bring something like that back.
And that'll help us better understand.
Right. If we're doing these things, then that should move us up out of that particular score.
And I think it's especially important too to look at that, and I think it's a great point, to see if like some of those interventions have been more successful than others, and then what, because if that's the case, then maybe it's coming back to the board saying we need to scale these up.
Right.
We need to scale these up.
So
These are showing
basically,
improvement.
we need to look first at why did they fail? In answer to Ms. Eaton's question, why did they fail? And then once we know why they failed, then we know
What they have to do to fix
what
it.
they have to do to fix it.
And that will be on the targeted improvement plan.
Right.
I see.
And that'll be on what, ma'am?
The targeted improvement plan?
So what we need to do is just translate that into a progress measure.
So instead of the third one here with the PLCs,
Right.
we need to take that out and replace it with.
Right, and it might actually be one specific for each one of those three campuses.
Right. Right, it might not be the same thing for each one.
Right, okay.
But if they're doing this key thing that we can measure as best we can, then that will. And they work with TEA on those plans too, don't they?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Just want to clarify that for the.
Okay, so,
Go ahead, John.
well, I'm gonna roll us back just a minute
Oh.
because I just, after this really good conversation, I decided that I should have, my bad, just stayed at the top level because we got 7 and we need to get to 5.
Yeah.
So rather than
Go through each one,
dive
yeah.
every single one, let's see if we can identify which.
Which two are the levers?
Right.
Okay.
And not that any are less important to you guys, but.
Theoretically, they could be absorbed into another.
Yeah, probably.
Maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe so.
Right. So we can think about that. So I'm gonna just,
Because staff satisfaction and teacher retention, those are so closely
Uh-huh.
related.
I was thinking the same thing.
You know,
all right, so we've got the campus performance one. We've got,
Equity,
the equity one, right?
Mhm.
then we have the teacher retention,
Teacher retention.
then staff satisfaction, student experience,
Student experience. So.
school
Just
choice,
Choice. There's
And
2 more.
choice.
School choice.
and there's still one more. And then students with disabilities, family experience.
Right. That's 7, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, one of the things, first of all, let's look at this. Can any of these be combined under another one?
staff status and teacher retention. Because we're talking about the
I
staff in
think the
both of
staff
those.
satisfaction could be one of the
Indicators
indicated the progress measure
What are the
under
constraints?
teacher retention.
Okay. So it could be a CPM.
Yeah.
All right. I see one more in here that might be able to be lifted in. Anybody
The
else?
equity and student choice?
I would say student experience. Is that the one you meant?
No, because the student experience one deals directly with special needs children, and that is a standalone. That area is a
That's
standalone.
the last one is the students with
Right.
disabilities.
But
There's another one that's student
Oh,
experience.
there's another one? Oh, the student experience? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Number 5.
The superintendent shall not create policies, practices, or resource allocations that impact the student experience without directly considering meaningful data from students.
So
Could that go in
is part of
equity?
student experience.
Yeah, equity,
Equity is part of student experience.
yes. Mhm. And that brings us to
Great,
5.
Great, now we're down to 5.
I mean, equity is so grounded in student experience at all levels.
Mhm.
And that, you're right, that takes you down to 5. Are you guys good with that?
Yeah.
Do you want to eliminate any of them? Anybody feel strongly?
It's not those that I feel strongly about, it's the way that some of these constraints under special ed, I think that the way they're written, sometimes people could misinterpret that we are trying to reduce the number to not have students in special ed. And I don't think that that's whatever the intent.
And that's not realistic.
Right.
Yeah, I was looking at the way it's worded.
The way the students with disabilities family experience one?
No, I'm looking at number 7.
That is,
So,
you're looking at 7, that's what I'm talking about, right?
Okay.
The superintendent shall not reduce transparency and communication regarding the impact, is that the one you're looking at?
I'm looking at all of them really, 1, 2, and 3, they're all of this is driven so much by an art committee decision.
You're talking about the progress measures.
Oh, the progress.
yeah, look at those,
Gotcha,
Patricia.
okay.
Okay, yeah, and we don't have to have those as the progress measures.
It
So,
could be something else you suggest.
yeah,
So those progress measures, to me, I don't want anybody to infer,
Do you have alternatives?
not yet.
What's your question, Ruth?
If she had alternatives.
Oh,
I needed to understand in regards to, it says the percentage of in-class learning for elementary students that receive daily instruction, including special education, 504, and dyslexia services will increase from, so,
That's inclusion and not pull-out. Is that what you're
Right.
talking about?
Yeah.
So that should say that our inclusion should be, but you can't, I mean, you can't,
I
we
have
can't
a-
make those decisions. That's the
Right.
art committee.
It's the art committee, so I have a real concern about writing something like that when this is based on this is all driven by the art committee.
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna misinterpret this and say, oh, Judson doesn't want to give the services to special ed students, and I know that's not what it is.
right.
Patricia, when you wrote these as an example, I guess, what is your normal process, right? Because what I want to avoid is you all having a work session with us if you had a different idea than you do. So do y'all connect on?
I think probably the best thing that we can do tonight, because my normal process, I probably shouldn't have even put any constraint examples down, because I gave you that whole list of them, and so I just took some off of there that go with that, but it was total confusion. That was my bad, I shouldn't have done that.
Actually,
So-
it's not.
You what?
I appreciate that, like, just to think about the possibility, but I also want to make sure that you both are on the same page.
Right.
Because now this is confusing further here.
I know, and I am trying to stop the confusion right now. So, we've got 5 constraints that I think you guys are okay with. So why don't we do this? Let's talk about what you think and what you think we should measure. Just ignore the constraint language in this document And let's think, like, what would be predictive? What do you think would be important to you? And then
And let me
we
just
can go
give,
back and wordsmith.
and let me just give, let's maybe 5 minutes, just so the board can look at this data.
Okay, great.
If it doesn't, if you don't want it, don't need it, that's fine, just a little bit more data to maybe muddy the water more.
No, data never muddies the water. So I think this is great. And this is data around these constraints. Perfect, perfect.
So,
That's-
yeah, so I took those questions and I put them into A.
Okay, what I had sent, yeah,
Yes.
good, thank
Uh-huh.
you. So,
And I guess for me, I appreciate Mr. Diaz wanting me to make the constraints, but without me knowing exactly what the board wants,
Not necessarily make the constraints, I just want to make sure that if you have a question on her example or a possible constraint, that y'all talk to figure those things out.
right, and we can as soon as I know what the board really wants.
great. And so I think we wanted to make sure that we had the constraint. So now let's just make sure before we go to this data, which I appreciate you bringing in, is the wording on the 5 constraints we've just, not the progress measures, but the constraints that we've just agreed to make sense to you guys? Because I put that wording down. You did not put that wording, I did, and I want to make sure that those are, the constraints make sense to you. Like, you're right, I want to see that. I want to know about that. So let's just start with campus performance. The superintendent shall not allow the number of students in low performing, and these are going to change to not rated campuses, to increase or remain the same. So we're not going to have more, we're going to have less.
Yes.
So is that okay with you guys? Anybody have a challenge with that? Okay. Going once?
No, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so then we go to the equity one. The superintendent shall not operate without examining the data annually to ensure no course availability or classroom inequities exist for students. It can either be that one, that language, or the language from the student experience one.
That was going to be my question.
Right.
If we're going to combine, then won't we need to reword the whole thing?
We can reword it, or we can take one or the other and put the other one underneath it. So what, when you guys thought about these things, what was more important to you? Is it about the student experience, or is it talking to students and making sure we're bringing in student experience, or is it looking at the data and maybe an audit and saying, are we making sure that there are no course availability, which are two different things, right? Course availability and classroom inequities exist for students, meaning do all our kids have the same opportunity for AP classes?
That's what's
All our
important
kids-
to me is the equity.
Yeah, and I think, for me, I think that considering the student experience falls under that, because you talk to the students, what more courses would you want to see? What, those kinds of things. And that would be a subset under equity. I think that falls in there nicely.
So I think this is the one determination that I would just push a little bit on that to make sure that we include is oftentimes we survey students, and then that survey data that, no, I don't have enough counselors, or no, I'm not getting the class I want, no, I'm not, students are telling
Right.
us that, do not filter to the proper department, and
Right.
the department reacts to it. And so that's where I think there's a little bit of that in that other student experience one that I just would urge you to include is, do we do anything with that
Right.
data? Are we going to listen to our kids? Because if we're not going to, then don't bother surveying them. And to me, that's departmental listening. Like, if you survey the kids about college readiness, like, do I have the supports? Do you have the supports that you feel are necessary to prepare you for, the college entrance exam? And they say no, then there needs to be something done about that, right?
And when would we ask them about that? At the beginning of school or at the end?
Well, that data would be a whole student experience deal. And do you have Panorama?
Yes.
Because that can all be included in Panorama at no cost to truly survey your students.
So we
and
could
take
do
that
it
into-
maybe before the Christmas break?
I
don't know
think
what
you
timing
could
would be.
decide when is the best way. I think you would want to probably act on it from, maybe you're right, maybe it's a mid-year survey that you
After
could
they've
then
been,
act
yeah.
on.
Sometimes they're surveyed multiple times during the year too. Like I've done like a mid-year and an end of year.
Are we going to get as specific in regards to saying high school students, middle school students, 3rd, 8th, and 12th?
It's a
Who are we currently surveying?
No, ma'am, we're not.
We don't survey the students at all?
No.
It's just the staff that are doing the climate surveys.
Right.
So even our seniors, before they graduate, I thought last year or year before last, or something, we had a exit survey for them, the graduating seniors.
Just out of curiosity, why the grade levels that you mentioned?
Those are the,
I guess 3rd grade, I mentioned it because they would still be there the following year to see if we make changes. 8th grade, the big transition to going to high school. So, I mean, I'm very open to other grade levels.
they're testing, those are the grade levels that test.
It could be at the end, all of them, 5th grade, 8th grade, 12th grade. I'm open to that too.
Maybe for me, it'd be important to deconstruct like what our intention is, what the desired outcome is, and then we determine who the right universe of students are.
Whose suggestion was this? Does anybody remember?
Student experience?
Yeah. Does anybody remember bringing that one up? Because maybe that, understanding why you proposed it might help us.
As I recall,
Filter.
we synthesized it from multiple things that people were saying, and student experience seemed to be the umbrella statement for it.
It came kind of in that equity.
Yeah, and then the other part of it, and again, we could have been, one of our work sessions could have been something else that we talked about before. Like, we work in a system that is intended to skill
Right.
scholars, and scholars have a small amount of the voice at the table. This is all adult driven, right? So, we've talked about that.
Yeah.
So how do we bring them in a meaningful manner? But to Patricia's point, if we listen to them, and
We don't do anything.
cool, like,
Exactly.
thanks for your statements, and then, disregard them, like, then they continue to be an invisible, the greatest stakeholder in the system.
Right.
And we don't
So-
want that.
No.
Well, and how are we getting to our CCMR goals? If, this is a value, this is if this is the CCMR goal we're trying to reach, then the constraint, remember, is how we're going to get there. And maybe the way we're going to get there is if we take in student input along that journey, whether it's starting in 5th grade, whether it's starting in 3rd grade, whether it's starting in 7th grade, I don't know, but taking that in and reacting to it along with academic data, along with equity data on course availability and all of those things, creates, to me, a more comprehensive picture of that CCMR journey and that goal. Does that make sense?
And it does, because part of that discussion also centered on the idea that we need to understand our stakeholders. And when it was mentioned that students had been engaged in that process, we're in a competitive environment now. So choice is very real everywhere. So any opportunity we can to determine what the needs are, what the concerns are, what the hopes and dreams are, we can definitely build that. And it would be incumbent upon the board and the administration to understand that.
Yeah. I think that's similar to having parent voice in choice conversations, right? In choice, like, we should be talking to parents. We should also be talking to students on that. But parents, have an idea of, I want a true dual language for my, school for my kids. I want a young woman's leadership academy. I want, my kid is gonna do better in a STEAM school, all of those things. And when we have that conversation about choice, what we're talking about is, there's only 3 things that'll happen around choice. One is you provide it in district and you keep your students. 2 is you create partnerships and you keep your students. Or 3, somebody else does it for you and you lose your students.
Yeah.
And that's what so if, making sure you're thinking about that from your, from a parent perspective is incredibly important, just like thinking about CCMR, thinking about giving kids pathways from a student perspective is important. So that's where these things, to me, live.
Now, Dr. Ball, I have a question. Like when my grandson transferred out of Hartman, they had to do an exit survey. So who gets those?
But please correct me if I'm wrong. The exit survey that we do have is asking the parents why they're leaving. It's the
There were
parent-
questions on there for him too.
Okay, I haven't seen, so that one must be one that the campus is doing on their own, because I haven't, district-wide, there's not one that we said every campus has to fill that one out.
Oh,
So
okay.
that one must be going to the principal.
Okay,
I
thank
was
you.
wondering that if that was something that was
Standard.
just a standard or voluntary for a campus.
Right, that one must be one that
Okay,
campus is
okay.
having. Now, we do have that, the one that the parents have. to
That the
say
parents
why
do,
they're
yeah.
leaving.
They call it the report card.
So I think what we can get back to on this equity one is, instead of saying, or in addition to saying classroom inequities, maybe we rephrase that around supports, campus supports, because that way the student voice could filter in there under that as a progress measure. If that's the route you want to go, a more course specific and support, we want to identify support inequities and address them. Because then measuring and utilizing the student voice
Yeah.
has to lead to inequities being
Uh-huh,
addressed. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Could we use, it doesn't sound like we have a student survey in place.
No.
The only thing we have is like exit surveys, which will only tell us about the students who are no longer in our district. But
And only the parent.
But we do have the superintendent's advisory committee. Are there goals that group has set, or things that could be put in here that speak to student experience?
There are, but the things that we talked about this year are very surface level things.
Okay.
The big ones, the big 2 were food and dress code.
Yeah.
Those-
Dress code?
Oh,
Yeah.
ma'am.
That's always such a big deal.
So I think the way you build out a student experience, there's a very specific way to do it to get to the deeper questions.
Yes.
And we can share examples and we can bring in some supports for that too. I have seen, it's just this is kind of a little bit on the cutting edge, is to really, really examine and have true student voice. It shouldn't be cutting edge, but it is cutting edge. So what does that look like? And there are some really great examples. So, but students are really smart, and they know that if you ask them something and then you don't do anything about it, they're not going to give you any more information.
Those were good too.
Some of it they will, yeah.
So, so it sounds like we could probably put something like that under there. Are you guys okay with, to ensure no course availability, or maybe instead of saying classroom inequities exist for students, saying something like campus supports?
Yes.
And the ones on I know I'm being really picky, but it's because if I'm going to be held accountable to this, keep in mind, some of the things that we do is we have hubs. So
Right.
if a student is upset because they go to Wagner and they want to have cosmetology, our cosmetology is in veterans. So the thing that, to ensure no course availability, could we clarify that a little bit more?
But it would be available, because my understanding is that if that's something that they want, they can catch an earlier bus and switch buses and take it over there for the course.
Right, but some don't want that. They want it available at their
No,
campus.
no, well, they can't have that.
Well, that's an adult decision
We
in terms of money.
provide it, and they just have to decide to suck it up and get up a little extra early and get over to where they need to be if that's what they want.
Is that like a rare instance?
No, I
No.
mean, it happens. It really happens. It really happens.
I mean, you'd have to look at it too. If it's an isolated, or it's like 5 kids, then, that to me means, maybe that's an individual address, like, we're just gonna help you figure this out. If it's, 500 kids or 100 kids, then there may
Right.
be something that is an issue, that there is a barrier, right? And that's all we're saying, is to use that data to explore if there are real barriers.
So like, I can give an example. If I surveyed the kids at Checa, I would guesstimate that 85% of them would say that there's a lot of inequities there. Okay? Because they want everything else that the other high schools have, but then they also chose to go there
Right.
knowing that. But they would still be, if I gave them a survey, it would come out very negative that there's a lot of inequity.
So what are the things that they feel they don't have that the other high schools have?
Everything from a dance studio. They want
Athletics.
a dance
Athletics,
studio, the,
But it's available to them.
Right.
They just have to go to one of the
Right.
other schools to
Yeah. I mean, that's
participate.
an inequity.
And that's not an inequity, because
it-
they know that before they sign up for the program. So that, to me, is not an
Is that
their
their neighborhood school?
No.
No,
This
this
No,
is
is our
Jackson
early
is
college
the-
It's
program.
the only early college
Okay,
high school.
okay. I
Yes,
see what
it's
you're
very, a very
Well,
special
and the
school.
way I look at it,
That makes sense now.
you know,
I thought it
So
was
that's
a
what-
neighborhood high
So
school.
that's why I'm
Well,
just-
then that's an inequity. so-
Well, but we do offer dual credit as well. So the home campus like Judson or Wagner, they offer college level courses through the dual credit program. So they still could get that objective, that's their goal.
Right.
It's just that I have lately spent a lot of time with kids, and I hear them. They don't believe that Rutledge, for example, that's another one. They don't believe that Rutledge Stadium is a district thing. In their mind,
it's for Judson.
it's for Judson. So they're,
That's true perception. I mean, that's
Right.
true.
So I'm just saying, I'm gonna be held accountable to this, that this is how the students really feel.
But it depends on what the survey asks.
Right,
Oh, yeah, the way you word the survey.
I mean, we don't just say, what inequities do you see?
right, we're not gonna give them a broad
And we know better. We know that the stadium is for all the schools.
But
We rent it
gotta
out to
get
other
the-
people.
And we also understand that we have to take some of what they say with a grain of salt, because they are
Kids.
young people, right?
But at the same time, not invalidating what they're saying.
Exactly.
Right, right.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Here's our reasoning for why we do it this way.
And I would say, like,
You know?
the student surveys that I've seen don't even ask questions like that. It's more so like, my teachers care about me.
Right.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
being challenged in my classes. And then what I would say is an inequity is if we're seeing very different trends
Right.
at a particular campus versus another campus. So, like, they should be questions that should be true for all of the campuses.
Right.
Not like specialty programs or things like that.
When I visited Hartman to judge the Black History stuff, I just asked Ms. Rodriguez, right? Yeah, Ms. Rodriguez. How are things going? And she said, because we do have school of choice, that the parents who have chosen to have their kids at Hartman that are from out of district, they are complaining that we don't provide transportation for them. And the way I'm looking at that is, you know, we are offering a lot of various programs in each level, elementary, middle, and high. But we have to let our parents also be accountable in some form or fashion for the choice that their kids have made, or they've made for their kids. So it's like, you know,
Well,
what do
and, you know, and it all comes down to, it's a money issue. We could provide transportation if they wanted to pay more in taxes.
Well, these we
know,
really
so-
couldn't, because these, I think you're talking
Yeah.
about people that don't live in the district.
Yeah,
right?
they do not live in the district.
If you were to look at
Well, then they
these,
should move into the district.
I think I think you're right, there's a lot of things, and I don't want us to get
Yeah.
way into the
Right.
weeds on what you're trying to measure
You're
here.
right. Oh.
But if you were to look at that equity constraint, and you took the first constraint progress measure under the student experience, that's a fair student experience. Do they report? Kind of goes to what Jenny was saying is, you know, responding
Yeah.
to student experience negatively or neutrally will decrease. And obviously, you're not going to have a baseline. We're going to have a baseline. So we'll have to build that baseline. So next year will be the baseline.
Well,
And I think that's a
actually
fair
I was
question.
actually thinking that we should do it this May.
Okay, get your baseline in May. That'd be great.
Yeah.
If
And
we
that
have time
way-
to build a good survey by then.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, we can.
And then you could survey, Yeah.
I have a leave.
Oh, I'll take it, thank you. I think it's just called it out, all the
It is.
It's just,
so I think that when we look at that, then it kind of eliminates all of these questions that we have about how deep we're going to go with our students. And
But I still think we need to combine
Yeah, that
the
would be
equity
one.
and the student experience
Oh, we
in
would.
some kind
Yeah.
of
we
way.
would
But
just
those
take
would
like
be-
that one constraint and drop it up under the equity one.
So constraint one under student experience would become a constraint under equity.
Right, and we wouldn't have the student experience constraint at all.
Okay.
Or any of
That
those
makes sense to me.
constraints, any of those constraints
Yeah.
could come in, you know, up under there, so we could talk about that and what. Sure. Okay, so we've got kind of the equity one, and we're okay with changing classroom inequities to campus supports, so it's more comprehensive.
I am if the board is.
Are y'all
Yes.
okay with that?
Mhm.
Then it's not, that kind of eliminates this, oh, we chose the early middle, but we don't have a stadium, we don't have a, you know, those kind of things.
Good point.
Because it becomes campus support.
Which would mean I have access to a counselor when I need to see a
Right,
counselor.
and that's
Things
important.
like that.
That
right.
every campus should have
Right.
regardless, right? And so that's what we're really trying to identify are the true barriers. Okay, so we've got those two. So now we're going to teacher retention,
Mhm.
and we put staff satisfaction up underneath that.
Mhm.
Oh, I did have information on this one.
Okay,
So I put the teacher turnover rate in JISD will decrease from 13% to a rate at or below the state turnover rate. And I did give that to you guys in this little sheet right here. So since that is constantly changing, I just thought that maybe it should say below the state, because
Yeah, you can't.
this is constantly changing. Are y'all okay with that?
Yeah.
it's keeping the district below the state.
Mm-hmm.
Is that good? Okay.
Then the next one, I took these questions specifically from the from the climate survey.
The state and not the county, just the state averages? Just because they do give on the reports, state turnover rate as well as Bear County turnover rate. So is there a reason why you picked state only and not Bear County?
No, so there's no reason, I'm agreeable to either one, I just thought the state would, but I could,
We can do both.
I mean,
We can do both.
Which one do you think is more indicative of supporting your students and families?
County.
the county would be my preference, just because it's local and we're looking locally. State is, both numbers are great, but local is,
But there was no point in us comparing ourselves to Dallas or Houston, I mean.
different market conditions.
Okay, so
Exactly.
county, county or state? County or state?
I don't care. What about,
Go with
can we go
counties.
with Region 20?
Oh,
That's
the
county.
region?
That's
It-
Region
not-
20.
well-
Region 20 is.
Well, 20, it covered, it,
Well, and you know what? I'm trying to remember if the report says county or Region 20. I think it's Region 20.
It says
That's the
Region
one that I'm
20.
thinking
Region
of.
Oh,
20.
okay.
Yeah, Region 20 would be.
Calculate
Okay.
county data, but it's gonna take us.
Yeah,
No,
because-
Region 20 is fine. Yeah, Region 20 is fine. That's what I meant when I said, because that's more in the county.
well, because if, you know, one of the things that we see, that we lose teachers to is Shirt-Cibolo, and that wouldn't be included in Bear County. For the
In
most
Region
part.
20 though would be.
But it would in Region 20, which
Yeah,
is why.
and it's Region 20.
Region
My apologies.
20.
Thank you. Who caught
Region
that?
20.
Somebody caught it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, then the next one I put, percent of staff responding positively to the overall quality of JISD. So I took that, and then I looked at all the survey questions, and the one that I thought could kind of give us that data would be the one that says, I am proud to work for Judson ISD. That was at 87. I only put 88 because 87 is pretty high. So I took that question. Would y'all like for me to read you some questions that you might want instead of that one? But that's the one that I inferred would be responding positively overall for Judson ISD.
And it was worded that way when they were given
Survey
the survey.
Yes.
And 87%.
said yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I see.
So I could quickly just read you some real
We have
quick.
one that's aligned more with staff satisfaction, like campus staff satisfaction.
Okay. Campus staff, well, let me just read some.
Okay.
I'm proud to work for Judson ISD. I like the work I do. On most days, I feel good about the work I've accomplished. I understand what is expected of my job. The work I do is meaningful to me. My job challenges me. I would recommend my campus or department to a friend as a good place to work. I tagged this one, but I thought that would be another good one. Our student code of conduct, no. I am given appropriate assistance to resolve disciplinary, no.
What about the code of conduct?
Yes, ma'am. Our student code of conduct is consistently and fairly enforced.
They didn't agree with that one?
Well, I was looking for one that matched this statement where it
About
says
turnover.
percent of staff responding positively to overall quality.
Oh,
So
okay.
I was trying to match it as close to possible. This one has to do with teachers are involved in decisions about instructional issues. My principal is effective in leading. My supervisor provides the support. And the reason I don't want to change these questions is because we've been
Right.
using these for 3 years. Now we'll get the 4th year, and I want to keep that
That's that
sustainable.
data.
How did you get to this constraint under staff satisfaction?
Presented staff indicating that they were necessary, oh no, where are you?
Yeah.
A 4I, a 4-1.
4-1. The percent of campuses with negative and neutral responses on climate surveys about the campus direction will decrease from 12 campuses to 15 campuses.
5.
5, sorry. Okay, so what I did, give me 1 second and I'll give you that one.
That sounds like a real good indicator on,
Okay, so what I did is I used 70 as the passing score. So I looked up how many campuses got 70 or below, and that's how I did this.
So maybe that's the one that comes up here instead of, under 3, instead of 2 and 3.
Right, so looking at this, I like that idea. Looking at this, there were 12 campuses that scored below a 70.
and the idea would be if teachers don't feel like their campus is going in the right
Right.
direction, then they may not stick around.
Right.
Right.
And if they wouldn't recommend their campus, they
Right.
probably
Mhm.
wouldn't.
They wouldn't stick around.
Right.
So maybe for teacher retention, we have the one that's there, number one, keep that, and then move this one up there and have 2 CPMs.
But we also do specifically ask about the,
Materials and resources.
I think that's
Okay, then
good.
leave that one there, but substitute this one for 2.
That's what
What do you guys
I
think?
like that.
I like that.
Let me just double check myself here.
Just because it seems like you're really already high on the I am proud. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
it's a good thing, but we're trying to,
Well, I would want to add an additional constraint with this one, right? That's what we're talking about today, right?
a CPM, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, for measuring. And one of those would be turnover rate on campus or transfer rate on campus to be indicative that you have happy employees. Because the rule of thumb is if you have a happy campus, you can have a very low transfer request rate and you can have a low turnover rate on campus. So if we're going to attack that issue, we need to see where that's occurring. So incorporating that is another additional measure to kind of see everything, in my opinion.
Okay. So you would add,
I would keep the ones we have here.
Right.
I think they're great. But I would add then one more measurement, which again is data-driven. I mean, it shows what the transfer rate looks like on a campus and what the turnover rate looks like on a campus to be yet, again, one other indicator of how things are happening, what the campus life is right now.
okay.
And that is just another, I don't know how to say it, it's different from the survey. That measurement is sort of like what someone says, but what actually happens.
So in the constraint progress measure that's here now that has 3.1, the teacher turnover rate will decrease from 13.5 to a rate and below. You would want an additional one that said the teacher transfer rate at JISD will decrease?
I would be interested, and I'm open for discussion on it, an additional measure separate to evaluate campus transfer rate. 'Cause transfer rate's not in here at all, but transfer rate is indicative of how staff might be feeling, teachers may be feeling at a campus. And of course, turnover rate is just another part of it. The turnover rate could be a management-only assessment because it still would go right into the turnover rate of 13.5 or less. But I would hope that Dr. Ball would say, okay, I have a 20% turnover on this campus. What's going on?
Yeah.
But transfer rate could be put in there because that's also, we're not losing employees. Employees want to transfer to another campus. So it's not really indicative of a turnover rate, but there's something happening. So in order to ensure that we have quality across the district, transfer rate would be something for us to look at, I think, as well.
I understand, your,
Can I just say
Yeah.
something? I mean, my only thing is I don't want transfers to be seen as a negative thing all the time because sometimes you're moving closer to, our district is so spread out, you're moving closer to another area to be closer to home or because your children, are going to, so I'd rather not lose, I don't want to lose those teachers. So I just want to put those 2 cents out there that I don't necessarily want transfers to always be seen as a negative thing.
But that wouldn't be seen as a negative, it's just a measurement of the temperature in that school or that particular area of the district.
Well, I just know how sometimes principals get, and they will, you can't transfer. Don't put yourself on the transfer list because then that's going to look negative on me.
Why would they tell their employees that?
They
I don't
do.
understand.
And
But we all, I'm sorry.
I can see that negativity as a perception of that. But your job in our assessment would just be to validate. We've just seen a lot of people move because they built a whole new area in the district. I mean, those things can be validated, but at least we're measuring them to kind of see what the pulse is in the district.
We have people that want to move from, I wanted to move from elementary to middle. We have teachers that wanted to
I mean,
move.
that's different though.
But it's still on the
But it's a
transfer.
transfer and you have to get on the list.
And we have, with these new innovative programs that we're putting in, we have teachers who are transferring to join that, or in the case of Converse, which was year-round,
Oh, yeah.
they transferred away because they didn't want to do year-round.
They didn't want to
And
do
that's not
year-round.
necessarily negative
Right.
or a reflection of what's happening at that campus. I'm not sure this is going to give us the data that you really
Would
want.
would it be fair to say, though, that if we see a standard amount of transfers, you can assume that it's standard? Now, if we were to see an
Not
enormous
for
amount.
the reason, but
Right, that's
just,
the reason, but if we see an enormous amount of it, then that's.
Then
a red
you
flag
wanna-
for them,
mhm.
right?
I just think that maybe that doesn't need to be a CPM here, but maybe that's a report we get. And then if something's standing out, Dr. Ball can investigate it. But I'm not sure that that gives the data that really reflects that this is a campus level problem that we need to correct.
And you may be right for an important reason, because you're right, there's so many variables. that
Yes,
could shift.
yes.
These are district-wide numbers we're looking at, so let's not muddy the waters. But we certainly, as you just
And we're not
indicated,
losing them
Yeah.
from
Right.
the district.
But,
I
but
think-
Yeah.
we can still pull the reports. We
Right.
can still have that assessment provided to the board and
Right.
get a sense.
okay.
But not necessarily as
Doesn't
part
need to
of.
be a
I'm
CPM.
going to stop you right there, because that violates the idea of what we're doing in monitoring what we're measuring. We're monitoring what we're measuring. And so my first question would be, is if you're worried about losing teachers, then, and that's what this constraint is about, we want to make sure we're keeping our teachers, then I don't know that transferring is a problem, is a challenge in that mechanism. So I'm not positive I still understand why you want to measure transfers. I kind of see what you're doing, but I would just recommend that you not pull reports that are completely out of the scope of your governance framework just because you want to see them. It's more work for Dr. Ball. If it's not in a constraint, if you're not losing teachers because of transfers, why do you want to see a report?
Okay,
What
Can I-
Let
Just
her-
to be clear, what are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like, and I will tell you what I would try to be trying to solve.
Sure. No, the initial thought was just to have another measurement, something that would be aside from the survey questions.
A
and
red
from
flag.
The 13.5 state average, something more local, but still can be measurable, still data-driven. We're not making any of these numbers up, they're real. But the idea would be that if we're seeing consistency in transfers, one of the things that I've told Dr. Ball is that we need to give our leadership on campus upgraded level of professional development, because there could be some issues with leadership. I'm not saying that there is or is not. I'm a big fan of keeping principals in place for consecutive years, but transfer rates are just indicative that there's a problem. And so I can assure you, if teachers are transferring, parents are talking, community members are talking. It's not going to be limited to, but I can't just sit idly by and say, oh, this is, something I can't do anything about. As a board member, I feel I have the responsibility to do something about it, and working with our administration to ensure we're monitoring that. Not manage it, because Dr. Ball will have to manage that. She'll have to come up with some assessment on what she needs to do, but the board should be informed.
Because you don't want teachers to transfer?
Well, we just want to make sure that it's not indicative of something bad. And as everyone has stated, it's not always bad. I mean, there are natural reasons for people to transfer. But just so that we're aware. It's just an
Well,
awareness thing.
And this is a superintendent constraint, which means we're going to,
Yeah.
means we're going to evaluate her on that. And
Sure.
it's not something she
Yeah,
has
and
control
That's
over.
why I want to pull it, because you're probably right. It's just too low.
Trustee
Sorry, Rafa.
Dean, sorry.
I'm sorry, Ms. E.
Okay, no, we're good. Okay, so you want to pull it, I see it, but, can I make a suggestion? First of all, I don't really hear of that many teachers transferring anyway. So I think we're building this up to be something that really isn't. But can I make a suggestion then?
Of course.
Okay, we get that, in our board packets every month, we get the higher fire.
HR
goals,
roster.
if somebody transfer, can it just be on there as a blurb, just like all the other things that we get
Right.
transfers? That way, if we look at it, we say, oh, 15 teachers transferred out of Pashal. What's going on over at Pashal all of a sudden?
Right, but we only do it once a year.
Do what?
Transfer.
Yeah,
And it's at
So
the
then we're
end.
really making a big deal out of this for nothing.
Yep.
Good Lord. Okay, okay.
But I would be happy to provide you that list because this is what we're doing right now. So till May 30th, we went out about 3 weeks ago. Anybody that wants to be on the list gets to be on the list. Then the.
How big is the list right now, Dr. Ball?
Oh, with each of the-
Okay, never mind. I mean, is it something bizarre number, 10, 15 people?
I mean, within the whole district, maybe 15.
Okay, see, you see what I'm saying? I think we just went down the rabbit hole there for,
and I was just looking for another measure, but as we're talking through it, it does make sense. But I do want to hear what Mr. Diaz was going to say. I responded. You had a point you wanted to make?
No, I thought where you were going with it, which was, I guess, not a huge concern, but like, was if we start noticing too many transfers out of one school, then what's the problem?
right.
But that's a Dr. Ball thing, not necessarily a board thing.
Yeah.
I agree, but we have talked about moving principals around, right?
And again, that's a Dr. Ball thing.
So then why are we talking about it?
Because Mr. Macias wanted to talk about
No,
transfer.
talking about, we be having discussions about moving principals.
Well, and that's the point. If you're not gonna put it, if we're not gonna hold, if that's not a part of this process or holding, then we don't have big discussions about it, right? Because you can't hold Dr. Ball accountable for something that you haven't put down in this
Yeah,
policy.
I get that.
Talking about.
To be clear, it's not a thing for me. I thought that's what you were
Yeah.
going for. But we have talked about it.
Yeah, she brings it to us and says, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, don't bring that anymore.
That there was-
I mean, and that's a her thing, and she's informing us of the moves that she's making.
But if it's not an hour thing, then
But we still need to know that these principles are happening.
Why?
But knowing is different from debating, voting for it, all those kinds of things.
So maybe I should do it differently to respect everybody's wishes. I should just not talk about it, put it on the Friday message, and everybody knows about it, but I'm not talking
There
about it.
you go.
Does that meet everybody's needs?
So I don't want to center my needs. I want to center what good governance looks like.
Right, she already told me I should not be talking about it.
That's the
I
good
didn't know
governance.
that because that's always been the norm for me, so.
So she just told me right now, no talk about it, I'm not gonna talk about it.
well, and I have to stop there because at some point, principals are high-level community positions. And just like when Dr. Ball made the transfer from veterans with Mr. Mendoza to Judson, that's a high-level deal. We need to be aware of it because we're going to hear from our community about that. Ultimately, Dr. Ball will be responsible for whatever happens there, but we should be informed.
Well, you provide a staffing report?
Yeah.
Like
But
movement?
During personnel.
I
That's
think
why.
my problem has been, to be very honest, Patricia, my problem has been that I have over-communicated. So now, this is gonna be different for me, and I think different for the board, too.
That's right. And so we're all gonna make adjustments, and we can fine tune. That's what next year will be. Let's start with the framework and then fine tune. And, definitely, if a principal gets moved up into senior staff, that's kind of something to celebrate, right? Like, we did good professional development here. This person moved up, this is great, because the other thing I was gonna suggest is that you do a constraint around, do educators feel like they're getting the good professional development? Do they have an opportunity, a pathway for their career?
And I think that one is one.
And if that's the case, then that's the question you ought to put in your constraint progress measure, if that's important to you. If that's what you're trying to get at. And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, I'm trying to figure out what you're
all of
trying to
it's
solve
important.
for.
All of that has relevance to teacher retention, for employee retention, for staff development. It's all very important. I would just say that, I'll remind Dr. Ball, that decisions do have to be based on data. And that's always something that I'm going to say. If there's a principle that's the best, in my opinion, there needs to be data backing up that decision. And that's just an expectation for me as a board member. But just as long as that's understood, I'll always be data-driven in that respect.
Good. I think this was all really good dialogue. We
Very
just
good.
talked about some really important things that are important to the board, and then fine tune what we're talking about here for what is, I'm sorry?
Let me take a break.
Sure, we can take a break.
5-minute
I'm
break?
just plugging along.
Is that okay?
About 5-minute break.
Okay.
Okay.
Plugging along is good.
I'm sorry.
Plugging along is good.
You two minutes.
Okay, so the time now is 7:25. We're going to take a 5-minute break.
Read over. You get it.
Yes, just messing with you. You talk perfect. I talk too much.
You're funny. Stretching my legs here. I can do it both ways, but I think I was stretching my lower back too. But
There you go. I was wondering if you did that. Thank you. Oh no.
And there's another dozen under there if you're the kind you like starting off.
Oh, these are the good cupcakes, Suzanne.
I love these.
Oh, yeah.
No problem. I got online and ordered it and then picked it up on my way over here.
Wow, that was great.
Love this. Just give me the frosting. I'll just get the frosting off all of them. I love cream cheese frosting. It's my favorite. Another drug.
Huh? Oh, sure. Oh, okay. It's give me a second because I was like,
Blue ink? Okay. You're going to fill this in?
I'll fill that in, because that's today, that's what I'm gonna do today,
So sign
look
print.
at it and tell me if that's how you want it.
but I'm dating it today, because
Okay.
we're notarizing it today.
Today,
We're actually
okay.
signing it today, but technically it was approved in February.
Oh, so good.
Now that they wanna get started on the work, it's like,
Okay.
where's the agreement? Well, you never gave us one.
Okay.
We approved it, but that's.
And do I sign that?
Yes, just sign that right there, the one below.
Okay.
Uh-huh. I think it's me.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
Yum.
Rafa, how's the juice business going? Have you been able to
don't.
find somebody to work this location out here? Young people, I mean.
Give me a bucket of that.
No. Teenager, high school? Okay. Wow.
Yeah, please do include him.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he had one on his plate with his name. If it just look through the window, he has one on his plate with his name.
So he's in jail.
can't
yeah.
nowadays. I think it's so much more mainstream.
Yeah, that's kind of outdated.
I think you have 10 or 11, something like that.
I only have one little brother.
10 or 11.
I have 7 older sisters and 2 older brothers.
10 or 11. I thought that was an interesting Gmail.
The number's like 5 better than superintendent. Not as bad as Jenny Rodriguez,
Mm-hmm.
but
We went a couple of weeks ago, or I went and brought it home, and they were very helpful, kind.
Antonio, not like
Good.
Jenny Rodriguez.
2 young ladies were working.
Probably a dozen.
There's at least, yeah. I personally know 4 other Jennifer Rodriguez.
Rafita?
She's the only person in all of the world named
Yep.
There's nobody else that name ever
Uh-huh.
I found. It is the craziest thing.
Well, there are no other Betty Free from home.
Little
There are
coupons.
Betty home and there are Betty Free from home.
Ah.
But I'm the original Betty Free.
Aw.
Married into it. I'm the only
Okay.
that was born that way.
That is hilarious.
Oh, they're growing. Look, and Santi is so big. Oh, my gosh.
Mine are hyphenated. My husband said,
Mm.
"Why are you using up your take on?" Well, put this back in.
That's how it comes so
Well,
unique.
when I went to go get my driver's license, they told me I had to keep my maiden name on there. So I did. So it said, "Here's my name, Betty Free from home." Aren't you like hungry all the time? Is that what you're doing now?
No dairy, no gluten, no sugar.
You guys ready?
I would die.
It's
I
a
can
lot,
only
yeah.
have my tea.
But this is week 4 though, so I'm used to it now, but.
Okay, we will reconvene. It's 7:32. And Patricia, it's
Okay.
on you.
All right, good. Okay, did we, I think we captured everything we were talking about for teacher retention.
Did we agree on the staff satisfaction one? We said we're gonna move it up there, right?
Right, the constraint from staff satisfaction up, instead of the current constraint that is number 2 under teacher retention. That was what we talked about.
Perfect.
Right? Everybody was okay with that? Okay. And we'll see this one more time once we've cleaned it up. Okay, then we talked already about the student experience, so that goes away. We're going to take that first constraint and move it over to equity. So we go to school choice. And so this constraint reads, the superintendent shall not limit students and families to only one high-quality option for their education. So how do we feel about the wording on that? Does that solve for any challenges? I know that choice is something that came up a lot from several of you in our conversation. So what are we trying to solve for? And what do we, and does this constraint solve for it?
Currently have school choice, anyone can go to the school and the district.
So
Anywhere outside.
One of the things that personally and that I saw at our facility, bond growth, in several committees, is the ability to go places is great, but now they're asking, or there's a desire for different programming in different places. So I think the first step has been done beautifully, that obviously in district open access, outside of the district people can come, and now we need to solve for why do we want it. Right, so the thought was always, how do we create a robust portfolio of options, programming that is obviously resonating with families and with scholars whenever they have enough capacity and agency over their own decisions to determine where do we go, right?
So it's not just about can you go anywhere in the district, but, and I'm just asking if this is what you're trying to solve for, but are we innovating in the district? Do we have innovative options?
There you go. There you go.
Are we moving towards that? And what does that look like?
Especially with the investments of the Chief Innovation Officer and that support.
And those, innovations can look a lot of different things. They can look like an entire different school model, a whole school. It can look like within a school, right? Something transformational that's within a school, like an IB program or whatever.
Programmatic.
Right, or programmatic, or they can look like partnerships. They can do a lot of different things. So what is the board most interested in seeing? And what do you think, and I think maybe this is a deeper question, is what's going to keep our parents here, what is going to keep our families here, and what's going to attract more families to Judson ISD? What do you think we need to solve for? How do we need to solve for that?
Right now, just to continue to build on what Dr. Ball has started within the district. We have new programs. We just opened up a program, ELOF, I believe.
STEAM.
Different programs like that is helping us.
So maybe there's a progress measure about the number of innovative programs that are offered and how that increases?
Yeah, because we can't go too fast and overwhelm ourselves as a district. And we need to get feedback on how well the ones we've begun are working.
I think the number of schools and the type of schools is also important.
There you go.
In terms of type, do you mean?
So whether they're in district or 1882 partnerships or like a split campus, just having different models be represented is also important. Right? So we can leverage our existing knowledge and infrastructure that we already have. But if we see a model that we can't replicate quickly or efficiently in district, then how do we capture that from an 1882 partnership? UTSA is doing one. Alamo Colleges, I think, right, Jose, has it with
A&M does too.
A&M.
San Antonio, yeah, it's pre-K for SA. They're all
Pre-K for SA is 1882. Edgewood did a couple with some nonprofits.
Yeah.
Right. SAIC is obviously the poster child for it right now. So the diverse type of partnerships, both in district, right? Because Converse all day is in district. STEAM is at
In
in
district.
district.
All of them are, except the Park Village in Metzger. That would be a partnership?
That's the,
System of Great Schools?
with TA.
So would that fit under your?
Say,
No,
No?
it's not 18.
Okay.
Like YWLA, is that 1882?
Yeah.
I think you would know.
Yes.
Well, I mean, YWLA, Young Women's Leadership.
The Young Women's Leadership.
Well,
So
Yeah,
maybe
that's
we
my-
want to,
The CAST network is
CAST, another
1882.
1882.
My
so maybe there's
grandson's
something
in-
about adding X number of 1882 type programs within the next 5 years or whatever, I don't know, something like,
That would be nice.
but but then that becomes top-down driven and not, what Dr. Ball has tried to do is have the schools determine, where they want to go. I don't know that,
I don't think they're either exclusive. So saying that saying that we're going to see 1882s is like a broad shell. The type of 1882 should certainly be community driven. But to at least put in place that we are going to make this level of investment because we will leverage additional state dollars is the shell. Now, what goes in that shell should be community driven. There should be a process
Right.
that is inclusive and resonates with whomever it is that we're engaging with. So that's important. Because my concern is, and we had this conversation before, if it's left to the campuses, we don't have a schedule set in place, right? They're not giving any directive that they have to have a model by whatever.
Right.
That's going to be slow. Every year that passes, we're risking somebody else creating a model that's going to take
Push us out. Yeah.
But we also can't include every campus because some of them don't have the room for it. So we have to take that into consideration.
No, for sure. And I think whatever chief innovation, whatever innovative plan comes to fruition,
Right.
takes those things into
Right.
account.
Absolutely, you're right, yes.
But at least having those high-level metrics in place to say, we will have certain things represented.
What are the metrics associated with the system of great schools? Like, are there things that we're already committed to that can be put under here, or?
Yes, there are. So a lot of them have to do with curriculum, redesigns. So That's a great idea.
They're kind of like process goals though, like, okay.
So, yeah, so
What about community involvement? Like,
they had to do a community survey, they did.
and
Is that what
so,
you meant?
yeah, because I think to Trustee Dees's point too, choice is driven by the community, right? They're either gonna walk with they're gonna either choose with their feet, or they may have say, look, we surveyed, our parents, and 25% of them said they'd like to have,
An art
single
academy.
gender, right, single gender education. Then in which case, then that would drive, so how do you bring that piece of it into it?
Right. The other thing that I just thought of is also in here, it could be, I have to work on the wording, but something more about the grant financial opportunities too, because that is what System of Great Schools has, is the financial component that comes with it. So that would be a good thing, is to, if I write something like to leverage more dollars coming in. So I think that's what I'm hearing you guys saying, that you want something that leverages some more money.
I think that's an added benefit of it, but that's a secondary aspect of it. The primary is creating that robust menu of options that can speak to different student personas and leverage the opportunities that we have.
Okay, so then hearing it said like that, I don't know if we really want to word it then. I like that wording, exactly how you said it, instead of the 1882 wording. So that wording was really good.
Yeah, but that is too big for me, because I want to make sure that 1882 partnerships are in place
Okay.
as a part of the greater menu. So in-district options, 1882s, because an 1882 basically does say, hey, nonprofit partner, whether it's Alamo Colleges or UTSA or whatever other models out there, we want to leverage your experience and your expertise in that specific program or style or model, but we're going to capture it within the district, still bound to us, still reporting to you, instead of the alternative, which is we see those applications for charter schools coming in every year.
But I think that there's ways to get that without the 1882, but you want a specific.
I want a specific 1882.
Right, so I think then if that's what you want, we have to put it in here.
Yeah.
So I was.
Yeah, no, I specifically want to make sure that that is part of the greater conversation, but specifically called out.
So when you say you want an 1882 partnership, you want an 1882 recommendation for a partnership brought in front of this board?
And then we can unpack
Because
that.
you can't, that would have to be a board vote. And so so what, if kind of going back to what are we trying to solve for? If what we're trying to solve for is choice, right? Is we're making sure that we are giving our parents, our families, and our students choice, right? Beyond what is in existence, then you could say in a constraint that there will be at least one new option, and it could be a full school option, one new school option every 2 years or a year, or there could be 3 proposals submitted that are transformational proposals for options, in which case then it could be you could bring an 1882 proposal in, or you could bring a transformation proposal in, or you could bring, what I'm saying, because if you're saying we want you to do an 1882 partnership, that doesn't feel like it belongs in a constraint. That's a whole policy conversation. You see what I'm saying? So I'm trying to, if we want to get to that policy conversation, then we need to have, what are you trying to solve for, so we can get to that policy conversation. And that would be, okay, Dr. Ball, we're saying that we need more choice in our district. What are you offering? What are you bringing to us? And if she brings you 5 really great proposals and one of them isn't an 1882 partnership, but you like all 5 of them, then there's no reason to go to that policy discussion. You see what I'm saying? If you don't like any of them, then you might want to have that conversation. You see what I'm saying? That becomes a very different kind of conversation than a constraint. Does that make sense? I'm not saying you should or should not have 1882 partnerships. I'm saying that it gets into micromanagement if you say you can only bring me an 1882 partnership. Whereas if you're trying to solve is for choice, she could bring you,
So many a year.
a variety. She could bring you a portfolio, process, which is her prerogative as a manager, as the superintendent, is to build, what does that look like? But at some point, it's got to go to a policy. It's got to go to a board vote. Because to create an 1882 partnership absolutely is a board vote, because you, as a board, oversee the board of that partnership. That takes it out of her. It is no longer in Dr. Ball's purview. It becomes a board-managed partnership. Whereas a transformation school, a STEAM school, or an early college is all within Dr. Ball's purview. Does that make sense?
So my question is, Rafa, isn't that what the diversification equity officer would bring as a recommendation to the board? Or through Dr. Ball, I mean.
Chief Innovation Officer.
Innovation and equity officer, wouldn't they bring that type of recommendation to Dr. Ball to bring to the board? Wouldn't it come from that employee?
I mean, theoretically, but we have to direct the vision for it to ensure that it gets done. Right.
Well, you can set the expectation as a board that, look, we want choice. So you're going to need to start thinking about that, talking about it, and bring us some opportunities around that.
Right, but just, I don't think that choice is good enough. I think that it has to, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think it's choice with an 1882. If I just bring you choice, is that going to be good enough?
It depends if they're really good choices. Right? Because this is what I'm avoiding at all costs. That we go just to one model because one model feels expedient or comfortable. I want to make sure that we explore all different types of models. Right? And we had the conversation before as to why administration across Texas doesn't like 1882 partnerships. And what was the answer?
Why don't they?
Like, I'm trying to remember what
Yeah, the answer that I recall is because the perception that the school district loses control of that entity. That's why 1882s aren't extremely, I guess, prevalent in hub ed. That's the conversation you and I had. Now, I don't know if that's still the case in the greater landscape, but I know that those conversations are often the ones that are had by boards when they're deciding policy.
Well,
Edgewood went through that long
An
conversation.
1882 partnership, by definition, is a school, an outside partnership that operates within your district, usually has the same personnel policies, but that this board sets expectations for that school, that board, and they have to honor it. That's written into the contract. It can be written in however you want. It can be written with your exact same student outcome goals. It can be written with a lot of different things. Some school districts don't choose to write those contracts that way, but that is the board's prerogative, is to write it however you want to write it. Does that make sense? So you actually gain control, not lose control. But you don't get to tell them how to get there. You only get to say, this is where we want you to be.
Right. Because that would remove the innovative aspect of.
I'm sorry?
That would remove the innovative aspect.
Right.
Or hinder.
Yeah, because you don't want to do that. I mean, that's the whole idea, is they have a model that could address a student population or an area that you haven't been able to maybe address, and they already got it. So you bring them in as a partner, or you have an empty building, or you have a lot of different things. There's a lot of different reasons to bring into that kind of partnership. But you get to dictate the terms of success in that partnership. That makes sense.
Well, the school choice basically says superintendent shall not limit students and families to only one high-quality option for their education. And in looking at the idea of doing an 1882 partnership, that would expand that opportunity. So we can always add a and or in this, but certainly we need to put something here that there's an expectation that we are being innovative in looking at what those collaborations might look like, those partnerships. That is part of, it's not in here, it's not one of these three.
Right.
So it clearly needs to be a part of this so that we're setting the appropriate constraints and expectations over the next 5 years or whatnot. But it doesn't necessarily need to say 1882 partnership, but it could, because it could be and or, right? But that's what I think we need to add in some capacity there,
Yeah.
without getting too far in the weeds. Just, we certainly want to see some different choices.
I'm a little reluctant to dictate that she has to bring us 1882s. Simply because there may not be those partnerships that want to work with us. And then it's not, we're evaluating her on something that's out of her control. I am comfortable with saying, bringing us innovative program designs that might include.
Which could include.
Right. But I'm real uncomfortable with saying, you have to bring us an 1882 partnership. Because that feels like micromanaging to me.
But it could be done through policy?
Yeah. Well, it'd have to be. I mean, she can't do an 1882 partnership on her own.
Yeah, we'd need a board.
It has to be,
Yeah.
it's a board decision.
Board action.
And I agree to what you guys were saying, is that we want to bring in this constraint. I think what I'm hearing is we want innovation, right? So what you're asking is, it can go one of two ways. We would like to see at least X number of innovative proposals brought to this board annually, right? And then you can evaluate which ones you move forward. That could include either or you could go a step further, and I'm not saying this is the way to go, but a step further would be, we would like to see one new school, after those proposals are brought, we would like to see one new school implemented annually, or 2 programs implemented. You could go as deep as that, but you have to, it's how far do you want to go down that path?
To recognize and validate Suzanne's concern, can the language be that we put out, that administration brings forward a plan, that as part of that plan, not exclusively, but as part of the plan, we go out and do a request for proposals for potential 1882 partners, and that be part of it. If nobody responds, then nobody responds. But ensuring that we do the good faith effort to call for it. Would that be appropriate? And would you be okay with that? Because that would include or quell the concern that you have. Not exclusive,
No,
but as part of, and then solicit those invitations for proposals. Nobody responds, then you're absolutely right, nobody wants to work with us.
So you're saying
I
that-
need to hear how that would sound to help me understand. I need to hear how it would be
Patricia,
worded.
how does that sound?
How would you word that? What do you
I mean,
say?
We're just getting deep in the weeds, and that.
Well, I think you guys are going in the right direction. I'm trying to, in my mind
Yeah.
too, is
Can
it?
somebody
do
tell
we
me
want-
what an 1882
Let him
is?
tell you.
I have no idea what y'all are talking about.
So that's just a different model of a school where you seek a partner who's already doing that model. It can be a nonprofit, it can be a charter.
Is it like
can
our
be a-
relationship with Toyota,
No.
ma'am. No.
Chrysler?
No, ma'am, we don't, Justin doesn't have one.
They don't have one. But like other school districts do, and they look very differently. But let's say, like Young Women's Leadership Academy in San Antonio. It's not an 1882 partnership in Dallas ISD, but it is in San Antonio ISD. And that means they oversee that school. They have their own curriculum. They manage that school. But the San Antonio ISD board
Overseas.
oversees the impact of that and allocates resources to that. It becomes a partnership that superintendent doesn't get to manage.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
I got it now.
Yeah.
And it means that the school gets extra funding per student because
Right.
of that partnership.
Okay. Thank you.
And it's an people use them for a lot of different ways. So I'm trying to think if what you're saying is maybe we would like the superintendent to seek proposals for, once a year for innovative partnerships. Is that enough?
That's too much, because we're not giving ourselves enough time to allow a program that we start this year to come to fruition so we can see if it's being successful, if it needs to change, if we need to add or take something away from it. So maybe every 2 years. We got to give ourselves enough time to see if it's working.
Well, I'm not saying implement, I'm saying seek proposals.
Oh,
which
just a
means
proposal?
Then you have to go out and seek.
And it doesn't have to be over the same campus. It could be a campus that doesn't have anything or.
Oh, okay.
I mean-
Well, in that case, yeah.
So X number of innovative proposals.
Come to the board.
Every
year.
2 years.
Well, this would
Or
be an
some-
annual, so you're gonna have to, even if you only
Okay.
want one, then
One
you
or
want
two.
one.
One
If
or
you want
two.
then
Yeah.
you want two. And that to me is saying, look, we're not gonna stand still. You've got a chief of innovation. What do they want to innovate and how?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
here are the models, here are the proposals, and you're not telling Dr. Ball or your chief of innovation what those proposals
Right.
should be, and some of them might have to be sought out.
Mhm.
But that also to me indicates that, what a great way. First of all, you guys as board members are around other board members who are doing some of these things. So being able to bring recommendations, but also you and your team get to go out and look and seek and see and talk to parents and talk to other communities. I mean, that's what you're trying to encourage through this, I think, is, look, we don't want to just keep doing what we're doing. We want to innovate. We want to go to the next level. So what is that going to look like? That's going to look like more exploration, more proposals, and hopefully more models that'll be initiated. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So I got to really think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do, right. Just so that it's not, because we can't set the expectation that they're gonna build a new school every year, right? That's a pretty tough
Yeah.
expectation, and I'm pretty sure you can't resource it. So, let's think about what that looks like. But if the board is open to those kind of proposals, I think that gives you a lot of leeway, right? To explore your world and however you wanna do it. Does that sound
So
right?
that school choice, this whole little,
All these,
this is gonna have to change, number 6, completely.
Yeah, pretty much.
worded.
Yeah, all those
That's-
constraints.
yeah,
Yeah, all those
and I
constraints will
have to-
go away,
Yeah.
and it'll just
Yeah.
probably have one that talks about the bringing proposals.
the only one I really like, because I do think it speaks to what you're trying to get to, is maybe that last one. Because it talks about, do all of our children, do all of our families feel like that they're taking advantage of choice, and that they have that opportunity to take advantage of the existing choice schools you have. Because that means we're not just seeking new choices, we're improving the choices that we are offering as well. So, does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay, Dr. Ball's gonna work on that one.
I do have one more wrinkle to add to this, and it's something that I'm hearing a lot of feedback in the community regarding parents outside of the district. So when we're surveying parents, should we offer these surveys to only in-district parents rather than external that are outside, East Central or Cibolo or SAISD? Because honestly, at the end of the day, and we'll talk about it in the future too, we really are accountable to the taxpaying community at Judson ISD. And so they're the ones who, their opinion is weighted the most. So I'm wondering if, take all the opinions, but sort of understand, are they in district or out of district, so that we can really truly evaluate and have a differentiation there. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there for feedback.
And that's exactly what the principal at Hartman was saying.
Okay.
That who we have to hold accountable are our families that are taxpayers.
Yeah, and that's,
We
again,
can't just say to every family that we're going to have a hub for you to go to, and we will pick you up and take you to school. They've got to have some kind of accountability, and so what she said is that she's really listening to her community, those families that are in that school.
What percentage of students do we even have that are from out of
That are
district?
from out of
Like
our
less than
district?
1%
I
is
don't
what I
even
guess?
know.
Small.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is?
It's so
Oh,
small.
okay. Okay.
well, it doesn't seem like it is. It seems like it's larger, especially like a Copperfield. And again, I'm doing my research in my district. When we are having folks move into the district and they're full, Copperfield is full. So the priority should always go to the taxpayer living in the district, but yet we have people from outside. So if it's 1%, then we're causing a lot of headache for somebody who's moved in and can't go to that school. And so that's why I would really like to know what that percentage is.
I'm gonna
Because
see if I can find it easily, but also keep in mind, a lot of them are our taxpayers. They just might not live in the Copperfield area, but they're still ours. I still
well,
consider them ours.
but I'm talking about East Central. I'm talking outside of the district. And you're right, if they come from other areas of Judson. But it just seems like they're,
Well, I think a lot of them are teachers' kids too,
Yes.
because our teachers bring
Yeah,
their,
they
their
can take-
students
yeah,
with
if
them.
they don't live in our
And they don't live in
district, they can
Judson.
go to whatever
We have a
school
lot
they-
of that.
which would that count towards that percentage that's out of district? We would count
yeah.
teachers, yeah, so.
Yeah, that would count as out of district,
Uh-huh.
because they have to fill out that paperwork
Yeah.
also.
So,
Okay, so I think we're getting there on school choice. I think you guys have had a good discussion about this, and what you're trying to solve for. I really like that. Okay, so let's go on to students with disabilities. Oh, I'm sorry, did you have something else?
I just glanced at Copperfield, because he mentioned Copperfield. 61 of them are out of the district, and 7 of them are employees.
So
61 children at the campus.
54 out of district. And how many at the campus total? That's about 800?
Oh, I'd have to go to another form to look.
No, that's
at.
okay.
Yeah.
It's about 800 and something, right?
Right.
I think it's 900, but yeah.
Listen.
And like another one that I hear a lot of concerns all the time, they make it sound like it's so many, is Wortham Oaks, and it's only 24. But when you talk to them,
Mhm,
Yeah.
it's 244.
Yeah.
But 24 is not that many. The highest one, if y'all, you would be surprised, Kitty Hawk, 48.
I believe it,
Um,
because trying to come to board meetings and drive past there is horrible.
Oh, they're overcrowded.
Judson High School is 98. I'll send all of this to y'all.
That'd be good to see.
It's good data. Okay, we go to the last one, students with disabilities
I think,
and family experience. So we're really, this one is kind of it's a very specific one, but we all know that we have quite a few kiddos, over 3,000 kids that are students with disabilities in Judson ISD. So the superintendent shall not reduce transparency and communication regarding the impact of strategic initiatives on student learning, specifically for families with children with disabilities. So what are we really trying to get here is that, I think this was yours, Trustee Eaton, that you were trying to get to make sure that we were doing a good job of communicating with our parents.
and the services for the kids, especially like the ones that get pulled out for additional, like dyslexia, some get pulled out for reading, math, those that are in inclusive classes. You know, just to understand that we have available to them the necessary staff for their service needs.
Okay. I'm going to be honest, I think the progress measures that I put in here don't really go with this constraint, because the constraint reads about communication
and transparency.
and with families. And the constraint progress measures are about providing those, right? Which I think, so what do we want to measure? We either want to measure, and communication is hard to measure.
Yeah.
It's a really hard thing to measure, so.
Well, the communication between the parents of those children and the school?
What we could add in here, maybe we wordsmith this a little bit too, and one of the constraint progress measures becomes a survey question from the parent survey, specifically to parents with kids with disabilities, and say, are you getting do you feel like your child's getting the supports? Do you feel like you're being informed of the supports that are available? Something along those lines?
Well, aren't they informed of the supports that are available when they do their 504 and stuff?
They have 504 meetings and then there are meetings.
And aren't they're informed then of what's available, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So,
Okay, so we don't want, so then that tells me that maybe we're not as interested in communication because that's already happened.
Because special ed is so compliant, how about if we look at all the data to make sure that all the R's are done in the compliant
timely
timeline?
manner.
Mhm. That one I could provide some concrete data on.
Yeah, the arts and 504s.
Arts and 504s.
We just have to like polish that wording, but to see are all the R's.
Say it again.
I know, I just lost,
The arts and the 504s.
The number of ARDs and 504,
Are they
or it could be
being done
two,
in
one for ARDs and one for 504s.
Yeah, are they being done
Done
in the compliance.
in a compliance timeline,
Yes, thank you.
in the timeline for compliance.
Yes.
And increases from blah, blah, blah. We want it to be 100, but
Right. But it's not 100 right now.
it can't be, ever.
I haven't looked that part
Okay.
up, to be honest, so.
Well, let's look at that. Does that sound like something?
Yes, please.
Okay, good. Everybody, anyone
So
else?
That's
then,
attainable.
Right.
then the constraint would be rewritten.
Yes.
Because we're not measuring
Everything.
transparency and communication.
All those three would.
All
Yeah, it'd
right.
be compliance timelines more than,
And then the progress measures would be about what are we doing to help make sure those are in compliance? What has to be
Okay.
done?
Right, right.
Is that something? Sound
Yes.
okay to everyone? All right, that is all of them, the 5, and we're gonna, Dr. Ball, sorry. Do it all.
you just got
Another
a name change with your
inanimate
birthday.
Dr. Stone, they might be talking about you right now.
Dr. Ball,
Hopefully that person's younger.
she is, no, I don't know what she is. We'll go through all these.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yep.
And bring the
We can
board.
do a Zoom.
Okay, cool, yeah, yeah.
Or
Happy to
in
come, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
we'll figure it out. Okay, so, the only things that we've already talked about the monitoring calendar. We've talked about all of this, so we're gonna finalize this. When I send you guys this in your emails, did you get it?
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
Did you-
absolutely.
You did? And you
Yeah,
looked at it?
looked at it.
Yes.
Okay,
And-
cool. So if we send you it again,
Yeah.
that'll be a good way, and you can give feedback that way, and
Yes.
we don't have to have another
Meeting.
3-hour meeting.
And let me and you also draft up our calendar. You
Yes.
can do that, and we'll send that already
For feedback.
pretty much
Right.
complete, and then y'all can say yes or no to that. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
So we'll have all of that. And so really, the only thing that we have left to complete, and we can do this also online if you want, is, because what I can do is, because I know you guys have been here a long time, and so we can do the board self-evaluation baseline. I did a baseline when I first started the work, and it was 0. So just so you know, it was a
Yeah.
baseline, but that is a lot. That's everybody, right? So what we can do is I can send you a evaluation in your email. You evaluate yourself.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to evaluate you,
Okay.
and then we'll compare them. And
Okay.
and I'll come back and say, okay, this is why it's this, and we can do that. And then when we follow up on the next time, we can have that conversation, but then we've got all the pieces in place. And
When you say that we're going to evaluate ourselves, you mean ourselves as a board or as an individual?
I know, I was asking.
The whole board or my participation as a board member?
no, it's as a board.
Okay.
Based on this
I'm gonna evaluate
governance
the board.
framework. I'm gonna give you the rubric, and that's gonna be the ongoing rubric to evaluate based on.
Okay.
I wanna see what you all individually score yourselves. It's
Score the
easy.
board
As a
at.
unit.
And I'm
Yes.
happy to walk through it with you on the phone,
Okay.
too.
So
I
we're
think
gonna
once we
do-
see it, it'll be explanatory.
Okay, and you have it in your
Is
notebook.
it,
So if you look at,
what tab is it under, do you know?
it's under the LSG book manual.
This one?
Yeah. And so I'm just, I think it'll take us an hour to do it, and I know you're all tired and been around, and I don't want to do it if we can do it separately. But I'll send you one that's a smaller version of it. It's the first few pages. It's on
Okay.
page 20, starts on page 22. And it's, you get scored, for you see, it doesn't.
Yep,
always
yep,
focus.
here we go.
Okay,
Okay. Yes.
okay.
Vision and goals,
So
board
each
has
one-
adopted student outcome goals.
You have to have, so, and I'll send you instructions.
Progress
I'll send
measures.
all of it, and I'm gonna call you.
Oh, okay.
You and I are gonna do it together. over lunch, Trustee E. But
Constraints.
it's,
Yeah.
you have to
Okay.
have all
Yeah.
of the first column
I
to
see.
get any of the points, or you have to have all of them. So we'll talk through it. Anyway, I'm just giving you that heads up because I'm gonna be emailing you it,
Okay.
okay? And that would complete it. So,
And then here's our tracker.
most of you know,
Okay,
but in this.
I like this.
This needs
You want to adjourn and then?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So that's it. You've completed the first phase.
The training for the rest of my time as a
No,
trustee, no more,
never.
that's it? That's all?
Don't get rid of me.
I'm just kidding.
Okay, well, at this time, our meeting is adjourned at 8:12 PM. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Patricia.